Fun Ideas Productions presents the Fun Ideas Podcast. Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and welcome to Fun Ideas Podcast number 20. Alvin, the story of Ross Bagdasarian Sr., Liberty Records Format Films, and The Alvin Show is progressing along. The one bright spot to all these delays is that I was able to add some last-minute information that came to light in December that answers many questions about who performed and sang on Chipmunks records besides the Chipmunks. Anyway, today's guest is a huge fan of Charles M. Schulz's Peanuts comic strip, and he has compiled many books featuring Charlie Brown, Snoopy, and all the rest, and including other books that Schulz was involved with but had nothing to do with Charlie Brown, Snoopy, and all the rest. He hosts his own OG blog and podcast, and he has written some stories for the late beloved Peanuts comic book from Kaboom that came out a few years back. He's also written about other subjects like the Flintstones, Yogi Bear, Grimjack, and Speed Racer. One of the things that our guest does is reprint books that have fallen into the public domain or are difficult to get in some way, but have historical significance. One of his most recent projects has been reprinting some of the infamous Green Books, which helped African American travelers navigate the South during the days of segregation. Amazingly, a movie with that title has come out, and the synchronicity has resulted in very healthy book sales for our guest. At the time I recorded this interview, which was only a couple months ago, Green Book had just come out, and I state that I think that I read about it in Rolling Stone, but was barely familiar with the movie. Well, 2 months later, Green Book is being considered Oscar material and could even win Best Picture, and I've seen it, and I highly recommend it. In any case, here he is, Nat Gertler. All right, so on the phone I have Nat Gertler. How are you, sir? Hi. And I guess the inevitable first question is, how did you, like so many others, become a fan of Charles Schulz's Peanuts comic strip?
Well, Peanuts was always around the house when I was a kid. In fact, my mother, she had 4 children, and she couldn't keep track of our names at all times, so she just called us all Charlie Brown. So really, it was sort of built into my lifestyle. I remember reading Peanuts strip collections at a very early age. Mm-hmm. So, and it just stuck with me.
How did that evolve into, I need to know every single possible thing about the strip and the man and everything else?
Well, it started with just wanting to read all the strips.
Yeah.
And the books at the time, there were several different series of books, and this book would have the same strips as these 2 books combined, and this book would have this book plus that part of half of that book, and it was very inefficient to buy books not knowing what was in, so I started to make lists. Mm-hmm. I don't have the world's greatest memory, so I started to make lists, and I started posting them on, I guess at first it's CompuServe, mm-hmm. Before the web was really a thing. And then eventually on the web. And so at first my good goal was just to get as few books as possible, to get as few books as I could to get all the strips or all the strips that were available.
Right.
After a while, I became fascinated with the book formats themselves. I started collecting Peanuts books. So I started running a guide for Peanuts books. In fact, in January 2000, I started my website with the listings in 1999 and started a newsletter in January of 2000, mm-hmm. Which got turned into a blog eventually and still going. Mm-hmm. So several posts a week mostly about Peanuts books. And so I became that guy, and I was just always fascinated, picking things up along the way. And I started doing other projects. I was also, about the same time that I started the blog, I was a publisher. I became a publisher.
Mm, okay.
And so I started looking into publishing some of Charles Schulz's non-Peanuts work, some of the things people haven't really seen. Mm-hmm. And so it all just snowballed. I kept on getting more interested, and people started to recognize me as sort of a Peanuts specialist, and it all just kept going.
Okay. Were you the first one? I think I hate to say it. I think I read it in a different book, so we'll talk about that. But are you one of the first ones to discover that originally they skipped over a lot of strips and actually didn't reprint a lot of stuff over the years?
Well, that was known.
Okay.
There were other people keeping very specific track of that. There were people keeping track of exactly which strips were reprinted and such. So that was a known factor. I did not discover that. Derek Bang did a very good job of keeping a list of how many unreprinted strips there were from each year. And of course now the answer is none, because they came out with a series called Complete Peanuts, and they wiped that all out. I was glad to be able to help with the Complete Peanuts series a little bit.
Yeah.
Partly because I wanted all the strips. I wanted to get them, but I helped them find sources for some things they couldn't find source for.
Yeah.
And then in the final volume of the Complete Peanuts, they did 25 volumes that reprinted the entire run of the daily strip. It ran for not quite a full 50 years, but into the beginning of its 50th year. And so that they were doing 2 years per book, so that's 25 books, but they wanted an even number of books.
Right.
Because they sold these box sets of 2 books at the end of each year. So I helped them put together a book containing Peanut stuff that Charles Schulz had done beyond the daily strip. There were all these books. There were ads for Ford automobiles. There were there was a booklet on how to use your camera that had a bunch of original Peanut strips done just for that book. Things like that. So I was the guy who knew where a lot of the bodies were buried. I was working with a couple other folks who also knew about things to look for, and we dredged up as much great lost material as we could.
Right. I was going to ask you about that, but let's go back to the first 25 volumes. So, and also I'll say the other person I was thinking of was Derek Bangs, but I don't know how closely you work with any of these other people or anything like that.
Yeah, I've known Derek for years. He edited one of the books I published, and he was part of the team on Complete Peanuts 26. So yeah, Derek and I are good.
Okay, and so let's talk about the first 25 volumes. What exactly did you do? Did you provide some of the strips, or what did you do?
There's just a few cases where I helped answer a couple of questions. I found source for a couple of 1 or 2 strips that they didn't have any source for, because there was like a Sunday strip that had never been in any of the books,
right,
but was in one of the comic books that had come out in the 50s, when the comic books were just reprinting strips, and it wasn't necessarily a Peanuts comic book. It might have been a Nancy comic book that they ran a Peanut strip in. So found that, or 1 or 2 cases they wanted some better source. They had a copy of the strip, but the line seemed to be disappearing, and Kim Thompson would contact me and said, I'm sure that all the foreign editions must have be working for the same stuff. It all looks that bad. And I would go and say, nope, here's a German edition of that very strip you're having a problem with, and there it is. Those lines are clearer. We can reproduce from that. So things of that nature. So you'll see a small little thank you note in a few of the volumes for things like that.
So were you the one that actually discovered it was, I don't know, one of the earlier volumes, not the first volume, but probably 3 or 4, where they had one of the early Sunday strips, and the first 2 panels were missing or something. Were you the one that found the missing panels on that?
No, they came to me looking for those missing panels. I wasn't able to.
Oh, okay.
Somebody else had a clipping, I believe, of the newspaper where it ran. But I think it was unfortunate they chose to have somebody else draw a couple panels to take up that space rather than us leave it blank.
Yes.
In the first printing, but.
Yes, I think they've corrected that since, so, yeah. But, so going to volume 26, I will confess that, I also, I didn't help with it, but I was talking with Gary Groth for years about this series, and I was really trying to get an introduction, and he just kind of hemmed and hawed. But I said, how are you going to end this thing? Because, I said, it goes up to 2000, but then, there's a lot of other stuff that had Peanuts appearances, like in the Happiness is a Warm Puppy or wherever, and like you said, the Ford ads and things like that. I mean, are you going to compile that? And he kind of hemmed and hawed about that. But then I was actually really excited when you actually did a 26 volume. I didn't know it was because, oh yeah, you have to fill out the box set, but hey, I'll take it. So
but even if you didn't had a fellow box set. It's another book. It's
right. I wanted it to keep going. I said, yeah, I'll do a volume 27. Come on, keep going. Yeah.
We do still have some material that wasn't in that, and we weren't trying to reprint the Happiness of the Warm Puppy books because those were available. We tried to reprint. Yeah. The books that we have in there are books that have been off the shelves for a decade.
Right, and that was my question. It's like what did you decide to include and not include? I mean, was it a tough decision or very easy, or what was your criteria?
Well, we didn't make the final decisions, which caused a little bit of problem because my goal was always things that were as close to being a strip as possible. So things with first off, it had to be Schulz.
Yeah.
There has been a number of Peanuts things done over the years that weren't Schulz, and we were like, no, we just want Schulz Peanuts.
Yeah.
The second thing it had to be Peanuts was what we were doing. Now they ended up putting, excuse me, they ended up putting some of Schulz's pre-Peanuts cartoons into the volume, but that wasn't something that the team I was working with even knew about.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was a strip done for an ad, that was great. These books, they tell stories, or they have character dialogue. That's great. The closer it was to being a strip, the more important it was to us. Also, we wanted stuff that was, if there were things that weren't in any Schulz book ever, that would be great. Short of that, if it wasn't in any Schulz book that was currently in print or hadn't been in print recently, that would be better than, say, Happiness is a Warm Puppy, which has been regularly reissued in recent years.
Right.
Yeah. So the volume 26 was never going to be complete.
Okay.
It was going to be Selected Apocrypha was the working title I had. I thought Gary Gross did a great job when he decided to name it Comics and Stories. that did fit, and obviously for those of us with a sense of comics history, Walt Disney's Comics and Stories was a very important volume over the years, so that was pretty good. So I think we did a pretty good job. I think we actually did a better job than the book shows because there's some stuff we accumulated that they didn't run. We heard there's going to be some longer text pieces in there, so we accumulated a lot of basically clip art, individual drawings that weren't necessarily telling a story or humorous, but could be used to illustrate an interview or something like that. And they ended up using an awful lot of that stuff where I wish that a few more strips that we had sent in could have been used in its place. But that's my own taste. They have made their decision. Fantagraphics knows what they're doing. Obviously, they've sold a lot of complete Peanuts books, so more power to them.
Is there any huge regrets or something that if it's not in that book that somebody should get to complete their Peanuts collection?
Well, my regret, actually my real regret, is that we didn't know what choices they were making when we were writing our introduction. So we talk about there being strips from the 50s to the 90s, and there's nothing from the 90s in there because the 1990s strip we had, which was an ad warning against chewing tobacco.
Oh.
It was a 2-panel baseball-oriented ad against chewing tobacco. That didn't end up being included in the book, so there's actually nothing from the 90s in there. So that is the regret. But regrets beyond that I limit because any unused Peanuts material gives me an opportunity in the future.
Okay.
There's at least one other book that I'm working on that will probably be at least 50% things that have never been in a book before.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go into the specifics of it.
Okay.
It's mostly single panel stuff.
Yeah.
But that I don't see the end of the complete Peanuts as being the end of Schulz books. Thank goodness.
Because that's what my next question was: are there opportunities for more, even if it isn't part of the Fantagraphics series? But you just answered that, so great.
Yeah. No, there's a few more. There's not an infinite amount of stuff out there, but there's at least one more worthwhile book to be done.
Okay. Now, there's other books that you have that are Schulz related. They're not Peanuts related, and I have most of those. And I guess we'll just kind of go through them and talk about them, and just the brief history. Most people may not even be aware that Schulz did anything other than Peanuts. So the first one you helped out on or did or whatever is It's Only a Game. So what was the reason Schulz did that strip, and how did that come about?
Well, Schulz just wanted to do a second strip, something that wasn't Peanuts, something that exercised some different options. It was common for a creator to do multiple strips back in the day. And so he started, it's only a game, really, it was designed to run either as 3 dailies or a Sunday, but as far as I can tell, I haven't found anybody who ran as a daily. It ran as a Sunday with 3 single-panel gags and then a small mini gag in the header. And Schulz did it all by himself for the first month or so, but after that, he just did layouts, and a guy named Jim Sasseville did the completed work. And this thing only ran for a little over a year. It started in 30-some papers, and it ended in 30-some papers. It wasn't growing. And Peanuts, of course, at the time, this was 1957 to 1959, Peanuts was already big and getting bigger. So Schulz didn't really need it. And he figured it was time it wasn't going anywhere. It was time to walk away from it. Sasseville kind of wanted to take it over himself, but Schulz didn't want that to quite happen. So that came to an end. And this is material that I thought had never been in a book before. I've later discovered there were a couple of little booklets that reprinted some of the strips, like 7 strips apiece. And we have not been able to figure out where these booklets were sold, why they were produced, but there's like one about golf and one on another sport. But other than that, and these are obscure, you're not going to find these things. This stuff had never been in a book, and I'm like, it's Charles Schulz.
Yeah.
It's Charles Schulz being funny. Some of it's very good stuff.
Yeah.
And I eagerly arranged to find copies of everything. Some of those things had to be scanned from microfiche. I have, but we were working with Jim Sasseville, the guy who drew most of them, and he had copies of all the ones he'd drawn, cut out of the newspapers. So we managed to work from that. Derek Bang interviewed him and got facts to put into there, and we managed to bring this bit of obscurity back to life.
Now, is it true that there's 2 editions? The version I have just has all the strips or panels or whatever you want to call it in black and white, but isn't there a color version? I think I saw that. So what's the difference between the 2?
There is now a color version. Well, I put out the black and white version originally. It's a nice thick book with 1 panel gag per page. A nice presentation. Felt good in the hand. But a few years back, I switched most of my publishing. My publishing company, About Comics, had been distributed to the bookstores by Diamond Book Distribution, distributed to the comic stores by Diamond Comics. And I decided to make things a bit smaller, and I went mostly with a print-on-demand production. And while I never wanted to do color books when I was doing them originally, because you have to sell so many copies to make the color printing worthwhile. Color printing has gotten a little better now, but still, it's much more expensive than doing black and white printing, and I am a very risk-adverse person. But when I was doing print-on-demand, the joy of print-on-demand is that first copy costs you only a few bucks to print.
Right.
So especially, I could keep the price of it down if instead of putting 1 panel per page, I reprinted the entire Sunday as it originally appeared on a single page.
Okay.
And so that's the color edition that's available now. It can be ordered from Amazon, among other places.
Okay.
And it's a thinner book because it's only got 1 page for each week instead of 3 or 3.5. But it gets it out there. It keeps the material available. In some cases, the original color. In some cases, I only had a black and white edition, so I had to create my own color to match the style of the strip.
Okay, so the contents are both identical to both books. It's just one is color and like the Sunday strip layout, as it were?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and we even kept Jim Sasseville's comments from the earlier edition into later. And we got better source on a couple of strips, so they look a little better in the color edition, even the line work. Which is actually one of the nice things about print on demand is if I ever there are a few strips where we're working from microfilm, microfiche, whatever, and they're not quite as sharp as I would ultimately like. But if I ever find a good copy of those, I can actually update the book in a couple days, and every copy bought after then would be even better.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. Because, like I said, I had the black and white version. I had no idea there was a color version, so, I'll have to seek that one out because that sounds interesting. And, especially if there's higher quality images on some of the strips that you had since the first version. So, another one that you had, and I don't know if I have these, so you will have to explain this one to me. Bridge Mix, what is that?
Oh, Bridge, well, when Schulz was pitching It's Only a Game, at first it was just going to be a panel about the game Bridge, the card game, which was very popular in the 1950s. All the newspapers had Bridge columns. A lot of them still do. So he was going to do a Bridge panel, and eventually it expanded to the idea of being about not just Bridge, but sports and other leisure activities. But every week there would be one gag about Bridge, and the newspapers could cut that out of the Sunday layout and put it wherever they put their Bridge column. So what that meant is I had 50-some gags specifically about the game of Bridge, and being part of the trick to selling comics is finding your audience. And I knew that I could sell books of It's Only a Game to Schulz fans.
Right.
But if I tried putting together a book of cartoons about Bridge and sell it to Bridge fans who might like comics.
I see. Okay.
And again, being print on demand, there was a low risk in doing this, and I found an audience. We've sold thousands of the Bridge Mix. It still sells reasonably regularly. A lot of the copies we sold were sold to Bridge tournaments who give them out to all the players.
Okay, wow. See, I was thinking it was just another undiscovered strip, and I go, oh, here's more stuff. But apparently that's also included in It's Only a Game if you just want to buy that version.
Right. If you want the Schulz stuff, that stuff, and you get It's Only a Game, all those strips are in there. Bridge Mix is just a marketing phenomenon.
Got it. Okay, because see,
I also have a book called Golf Gags by Classic Cartoonists, and it's got a lot of Schulz in there, but all but two of the Schulz cartoons that are in it are It's Only a Game cartoons.
Got it. Okay, because see, I'm like you, or at least in a certain way, is I'm a completist. I want to get everything Schulz, and I go, well, if there's something else I don't have here, I want that.
Yeah. No, I would want to buy that book if I didn't make it. That's because I'm trying to buy all of the books. I have over 1,000 Peanuts and Schulz-related books in my GOG.com reference library. So I'm insane that way.
Yeah. Another one listed is Spares. Is that the similar thing as Bridge Mix, but about bowling? Is that correct, or no?
Yes, Spares is about bowling, and it used a mix of stuff from It's Only a Game and from Schulz's work for the Church of God. He used to do a cartoon series for the Church of God, and Spares is only available for a very short while because I was publishing another book you see on the list called Schulz's Youth. And what that was a collection of all the cartoons that he had done for the Church of God. Mostly it was this panel that actually got syndicated to other church papers about teenagers and the church. Single panel gag. A lot of that had been collected over the years. Schulz's Youth had all of the panels that had been collected and a dozen or two that hadn't ever appeared in book form before. But everything else was long out of print by that point. So I was glad to be able to put them back. Plus, with the deal I made with it, I was able to put out things like Spares and aim it for bowling people because there was enough bowling gags between the two things to make a fairly thin book. But that was only on the market for a little while.
Okay. Now, I have Schulz's Youth. Now, and that one, and I also have the original books that came out in the 60s, the Young Pillars, and I can't think of the other two, but there's three of them if I remember correctly.
Old Bug and Old Sparrow, those.
Yeah. So you got all those strips, I'm sure, from that, or panels or whatever, from those books. But the ones that were missing, how did you accumulate those? Were they in the... Go ahead.
I was dealing with Warner Press. That's the publishing arm of the Church of God. But I say Warner Press, people think I'm dealing with DC Comics, but no, that's Warner's, Time Warner's, Warner Brothers, but it's not Warner Press. Warner Press is the publishing arm of Church of God, and they had put out some of those collections you were talking. The collections you were talking about. They were also licensed over the years a couple collections to other publishers, so they have archives of the had in one of these other books, but then there was also the few that didn't, and I was glad to have found them, glad to bring them out. I also told them to look in a magazine called Reach, and they told me, no, Reach didn't start until after Schulz was done doing cartoons for us. There's nothing in there. And I said, look in the magazine called Reach, and they're like, no, we talked to the editor of Reach. Schulz never did work for it. They said, please look in the magazine called Reach, and they found 5 more cartoons. So, it helps to know where things might be hidden.
Yes. Now, what's the story in the 2 books? One's called Zipper on My Bible is Stuck, and God's Children. Are those compilations from those other books, or?
Those are compilations of the Church of God material. I did books to pitch to other publishers. I was talking to some publishers in the Christian book marketplace.
I see.
So those be books designed for the Christian bookstores. I had some nibbles but no bites on them, and my time was running out, so I put them out, made them briefly available. But it's the same material, just arranged differently, presented in full color, made to look more like Happiness is a Warm Puppy book.
I see. Where
you have the picture on one side and the text facing it.
Okay, so again, those have color, but if you want to have all the panels, get Schulz's Youth.
Yeah, Schulz's Youth, and Schulz's Youth is unfortunately out of print. That was something I'd licensed, and I ran through my license on it. Okay. They can be found used, and I think anybody who's really into Schulz would enjoy that.
Okay. Yeah, as usual, that would be the version I'd want, just because it has all of them. Unless you did reissue it complete again in color or something else that would make me want to buy it that way.
Yeah, well, I reissue it in color. You shouldn't want it because those were things that Schulz did in black and white.
I see. Okay. All right. Good to know. There are some, I'll talk about some other ones here, but, just some books that kind of popped in my head. Would these ever be recompiled at any point, like 2x4s or Dear President Johnson, or even the Kids Say the Darndest Thing books or things like that? Would you ever consider those, or is that...
Well, all the cartoons from 2x4s are in Schulz's Youth.
Oh, okay. That's right. It is in there.
The text isn't, and Schulz actually did work on the text of that book. For people who haven't heard of it, that's a book on bringing up very young children in the church. Mm-hmm. And so Schulz has some things to say about that, as well as his co-author Kenneth Hall. But people think that Schulz just did the cartoons, and he didn't. The Dear President Johnson, I actually have reprinted. It's now available for me. I licensed that.
Oh, okay.
It was multiple licenses because the Schulz family owned the art and Bill Adler's family owned the text. But I cut a deal with both of them, and we sell that through Amazon. But actually, most of the copies we sell are sold through museums because there's a Charles Schulz museum and there's an LBJ museum.
I would never think of having it at well, I guess it makes sense. Dear President Johnson, yes. Of course.
Museums are my main second. Amazon is my biggest market for everything I publish. But museums are my significant second market. I sell very rarely anything to comic stores anymore.
Wow. Okay.
But I do very, very nice business, although a lot of it isn't the comics material, with museums, the museum gift shops.
Now, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was saying, in your reprint of it, is there any extra material or annotations or missing strips that weren't in the original book, or not strips, but artwork?
No, there's no additional artwork in the Dear President Johnson. Most of it is just scanned from the originals, making it available again. The one change we did is we removed all the cursive writing and replaced that. Because they're not genuine. They aren't genuine copies of the original letters that to President Johnson. They were always very clearly had been redone for presentation. But kids these days don't read cursive. A lot of them. A lot of them never learn cursive. So I thought, in order to be able to sell this to the kids who are on their field trip to the LBJ Museum, it would help if we use handwritten fonts, or actually got my own kids to hand copy some of the letters. So to make them look authentic, but they're not no cursive in there.
Okay. So it is a little bit different, but there's no real need if you have the original, which is what I have. But I was just kind of curious about that. And then the other one I mentioned, the two ArtLink letter books. The kids say the darndest things, and I think there's a sequel, right?
Yeah, Kids Say the Darndest Things and Kids Still Say the Darndest Things, both illustrated by Schulz. But Kids Say the Darndest Things is actually in print.
Okay. But would you ever have a need or want to just take the images out of those books and do that as a separate volume of something?
Well, I would use them. I thought about doing a big pile of any scrap of Schulz book, and I would definitely try to use those. But I've used some of that imagery on my blog and such. The Kids Say, the first volume, Kids Say the Darndest Things, because it's sometimes very handy to have Charles Schulz kids that aren't Peanuts.
Right. In any of your collections or going through things, and I'm sure you worked with the Charles Schulz Museum over the years, are there original artwork for any of these that still exist, or is it all scans from books and things like that?
For some of this stuff, there is some original artwork out there. The Schulz Museum has a fair portion of the strips that Sparky Schulz, that Schulz drew for It's Only a Game, for example.
Okay.
So they've got some of that. I don't know if they have any of the Schulz's youth material. I have seen bits of Dear President Johnson for up at auction. Don't have the money to buy them, but I actually helped somebody identify what is this Peanuts thing. Yeah. Like, no, that's not a Peanuts thing. That's Dear President Johnson, page whatever. So the material still exists. It didn't all disappear somewhere. What I'd really like to find out, that's right, I was about to say, I wanted to find out is whether any of the Ford comic strips that still exist, but then I remembered, yes, they do. The Schulz Museum has some of the Peanut strips that was done for the Ford Falcon.
Yeah, I always ask about that because it's like when you interview different people about different things, it's like, oh, yeah, I'm making it up, but, oh, yeah, all the Peanuts drawings done for, this book, they were just tossed out because nobody cared, It's like, and then you're like, whereas, most of the original dailies, I think, all still exist of the real Peanut strip. I don't think there's any that are lost. Maybe there are.
No, some definitely got lost because there was the fire in the coffee grounds, Schulz's old studio.
Oh, yeah.
That took some of them. And then, unfortunately, more recently, Charles Schulz's house burned down where his wife Katie was still living. And they had some art on the walls and stuff like that. So there's definitely some that have been destroyed. But there's also some, who knows where it is. It's out there. The Schulz Museum has been trying to reacquire what they can. And I've actually helped them once or twice figure out what a piece of art was. There was this one oversized, it was larger than a Sunday page, Peanut strip. And that was up for auction, and they weren't sure what it was. Jeannie Schulz, Charles Schulz's widow, contacted me and was like, what is this thing? And I that was from Look magazine. He drew, Look magazine was doing an article about him, and he drew a strip just for them. And yes, that is something you want because A, it's big, and B, if you look carefully, it introduces all the characters. It was like, this is a strip done for Look magazine for people who don't know any of the characters, so everybody who was regular in the strip at the time marches through in the course of the strip. So that was a pretty cool one to find. I'm glad that survived. And that one is in Complete Peanuts 26.
Oh, okay. I'll have to look at that one again, that volume, just to see what's in there again.
Actually, it's easy to not find it. People have repeatedly told me, is it really there? Yes, it's on the back cover.
Yeah.
So you sit there and look, and you're not finding it, but you're not looking at the cover.
Okay. I will look at the back cover. question just popped in my head because, I was just thinking about the just different spots I've seen Peanuts artwork. In those calendars that used to appear from Determined Productions in the 60s and 70s predominantly, I guess they went into the 80s too a little bit, were those original drawings by Schulz for the calendars, or were they just frame blow-ups from the strips?
I'm afraid I haven't really looked much at the calendars, so I really can't say.
Okay.
Determined definitely used frame reproductions for a number of things, and also pasted pieces together for a number of shots I've seen in some projects.
Okay.
But if you look at like the book Suppertime, is all, which is one of the Happiness is a Warm Puppy series of books.
Right.
But Suppertime, it's all individual panels taken from strips, which a lot of the previous books hadn't been original Schulz. But I guess that was one way of getting out one more book without. Well, Schulz was very busy in the 1960s. There was a lot going on. Suddenly you're doing TV specials, you're doing movies, you've got a play going on based on your work. There was enough things tying up his time, so I can understand why they wanted to get something out that was simpler on him.
Right. Did he have contraction? He must have, or something. But was there a reason to keep doing those smaller books like Happiness is a Warm Puppy? Because it seemed like the first couple were really wildly successful, like Security is a Thumb in a Blanket, blah blah blah. But then you're talking about things like Suppertime and Happiness is a Sad Song and stuff. Surely those weren't as popular as the earlier ones. What kept him doing those? Was he under contractual obligation to do those? I never really knew the story behind those.
I don't think there was a deep contractual obligation, but there was somewhat of a close relationship with the people at Determined.
I see.
So there was a very friendly relationship. But you could sell a lot less than Happiness is a Warm Puppy sold and still have a very worthwhile book. I mean, Happiness is a Warm Puppy was on the bestseller list for over about a year.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, of course. I was just kind of curious. And then, it got to the end there that he did just strip reprints, and I don't even know if there's any new artwork in Peanuts Cookbook and the Lunch Bag Cookbook. Maybe the cover artwork was new, but was that just a last-ditch effort to get a couple more books after Schulz himself got too busy to work on them, or what's the origins of those?
Well, if I remember correctly, the cookbook author was the sister of the head of Determined Productions.
Yeah, I think that's right, yeah.
So yeah, she was doing other cookbooks for them.
Yeah.
So it's a logical thing. People were putting Peanuts on everything. The weirdest thing Determined Productions ever did, in my mind, is they put out a book called Peanuts Projects, which was an activity book. It had mazes, it had things to cut apart, it had a play in it to perform, and this was before there was any Peanuts plays. It had all kinds of amazing stuff, but the cover to it says Peanuts Projects in very square lettering, and it has pictures of an inkwell and paintbrushes and all the things you might want to use, and it says paint, Brad, it uses Brad as a verb, paste. There are no pictures of Peanuts characters on the cover. There's nothing that really lets you know this is Peanuts, that this is the comic strip Peanuts. And this is one of the most valuable things going at the time. I mean, this is before Charlie Brown Christmas, but we're still talking, I think it was 1963. But it's still a huge property, and why do you bother doing it and not advertise it?
That's weird, yeah.
That was strange. I did a whole episode of my podcast on that book.
I'll have to listen to your podcast, so I'll talk about that a little bit later. But more questions about Determined. What happened to them? I mean, it seemed like they were going pretty well for about 20 years or so, and then the calendars started getting published by other printers, and it's just like everything else. Even in other Peanuts books, is it just the contracts ran out, or did the company kind of go belly up? Which seems amazing to me if they had such wild success early on, or what was their story?
That detail, I really don't know. I really can't answer for you.
Okay. Because I know Determined did other books over the years, even in the same size as Happiness is a Warm Puppy. Like there's a book called Booze, and a book called Washington, D.C., and I've seen other ones, and it's just like, okay, they're trying to capitalize on that format. I've even seen Dennis the Menace book. Although it's a slightly larger size, it is a square, and they're trying to capitalize on that same happiness as a warm puppy, but it didn't really work in his
Well, to a certain degree, everybody's still trying to capitalize on happiness as a warm puppy,
right.
in that, as best as I can tell, that was effectively the invention of the modern gift book.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the simple text, a number of pictures, things you buy to give as a little gift book, and so much came after it. In addition to so many parodies of happiness as a warm puppy, there were a lot of those put out over the years. But just the whole, if you see an inspirational book by the counter of your bookstore, that is probably there because Happiness is a Warm Puppy was such a hit in the 1960s.
Now, who came up with the idea? Was it Schulz himself, or somebody else suggested it to him, or how did that work?
I think that the determined people had seen the Happiness is a Warm Puppy strip and said, "We got something here. Can you give us a book of this?"
Okay.
If I recall correctly.
Sounds good.
But I'll tell you something. There's a reason I never call myself a Peanuts expert. I'm a Peanut specialist.
Okay.
But I'm aware that there is so much stuff that I do not know. I mean, you can, with Peanuts, it is so wide and so broad and comes from so many different media and things like that. There are so many rabbit holes that one can go into in terms of the history, in terms of the business, in terms of all sorts of things, that I am more aware than anybody else of how much I still do not know. So I'm a Peanuts specialist.
Yeah.
Or actually, I go by professional Peanuts nerd often.
I was going to say, I'm a novice compared, although I have been a huge Peanuts fan for a long time, but I think through you and through Derek and a few others, it's like I've learned a lot of stuff, that I didn't know before, and it's like I'm still learning things. So, and I piece things together and figure it out, but I'm always curious if I'm right or totally off the mark on things. It is kind of interesting, but I guess it's just that one thing led to another, that the Happiness as a Warm Puppy came out at that time, from the standpoint of, you'd think that he would have made the bigger splash on TV first, and then there'd be a cash-in book or something like that, not the other way around. But
Peanuts was already getting pretty huge. I mean, Peanuts was already winning the Reuben Award, and Peanuts was in a lot more papers than when it started. Peanuts was a popular thing already, and in fact, it was about then you're also seeing Peanuts animation just on ads on TV on the Tennessee Ernie Ford show.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a big thing to be exploited. Just like Dilbert we had books certainly before there was any attempt at animated Dilbert, but animated Dilbert was unimportant.
True.
And still.
A little bit of apples and oranges, but I get what you mean. Yeah. Now, you did one book that actually kind of fits nicely with the Happiness as a Warm Puppy series, even though it was done years later, is Charlie Brown's Christmas Stocking. How did that book come about?
Well, Charlie Brown's Christmas Stocking was that I knew there were these stories that were lying around that had been done for women's magazines in the 1960s, and they weren't, I can't call them obscure because those magazines were selling in the millions at the time, but it seemed to, the ways that these things had not been in print in book form ever. And I also realized that if you broke, one of them was presented with single panels with a text underneath, and the other one was done more as a comic story over 2 pages. But if you broke them down to single panels, you had a nice, thin little book that told 2 stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love, I was like, why is this lying around? So I basically designed the book and showed it to Kim Thompson at Fantagraphics, and he was like, yeah, of course, Charlie Brown, Christmas, those 2 things go together pretty well. We could probably sell a few copies of that. So, and we ended up rerunning the material also in Complete Peanuts 26.
That's right.
But before that happened, one of the stories from there was also released as a sew your own cloth book. They did a number of books that are just basically just a sheet of fabric, and you cut and you sew and you make a cloth book. And that was just to me a sign that I'd rescued something. That by bringing it out and back in book form, it was now going to find another home, and it would be an alive piece of work, and I was really glad to see that.
Now, what made you discover it? Did you see it in the magazine originally when it came out, or you'd heard about it, or because it's sold in the millions, I guess, but people don't necessarily keep those type of magazines; they just throw them out. So
Yeah, but if they don't throw them out, they list them on eBay. And as a collector, sorting through things, I discovered things that were on eBay, and
okay.
We ended up putting 2 of the 3 Christmas stories in there, and we should have thought about putting the third, but I didn't at the time.
Okay.
But that ended up in Complete Peanuts too. The third one was sort of interesting because it was a story that started in Better Homes and Gardens and ended in the Daily Strip about putting on a Christmas pageant, and Linus doing his part in a Christmas pageant. And you can read either half of it, and you're fine. You don't know the other half exists.
Yeah.
But the strips, the newspaper strips, had been reprinted so many times over the years, and nobody knew about the Better Homes and Gardens part of it. But we did put that in Complete Peanuts 26, so that has been rescued.
I do remember that, yeah. Now, at this point, is there anything from some of those women's magazines that hasn't seen reprint yet, or is it pretty much done?
Not that I'm aware of. There's always a chance there's something else out there, but those 3 were the real original works. A lot of times the women's magazines would run excerpts from the new Happiness is a Warm Puppy type book or things of that nature. One women's magazine ran the text from, I think it was Peanuts Jubilee, which is this great big reprint with tons and tons of Sunday strips in color, but they just ran the text and they just put out the cover like $19.95 value or whatever the price was of the book, as if it was just as good to get the text of a book full of Peanuts strips as it was to get a book full of Peanut strips.
Wow. Okay. Let's see. Now, one of the other things that you helped and wrote a number of strips for, or actually stories for, I should say, is there's a newer Peanuts comic book for Boom at the time. How did that come about, that comic book series?
The Peanuts folks had talked to a few people about possibly doing some new stories and new material, not obviously drawn by Schulz because he was dead, and if they could have gotten him to draw it, that would have been great. But so I'm not quite sure how Boom was settled on because I wasn't there right at the very beginning, but I had known before Boom announced it that there were some talks going on. And that material was all really effectively overseen by the Charles Schulz studio.
Okay.
Creative Associates. And once it got going, I was like, hey, I'm a Peanuts guy. The folks at Schulz Studio knew me. I already written books about Peanuts, officially licensed stuff. And by the way, I'm also an Eisner Award nominated comics writer. Maybe I could do something for you. And I did like 10 stories for them.
Okay. Now, forgive me, I don't remember when this was. If it's your blog or if it was somewhere else, but I was thinking it was on your blog, that you actually literally went through every Peanuts comic book in the past, including Nancy and Tip Top and everything else, and you did find every instance where Schulz himself actually did some new material for the comic book, and it probably was like 2 stories or something like that. Is that correct?
It was more than 2 stories.
Okay.
There was a couple of stories for Nancy, and then there was much of one of the issues of the Dell Peanuts. Apparently, there was one issue where, for some reason, they had about 24 hours to get it done, and I believe Jim Sassville drew. And at that point, the Peanuts comics were running without ads, so it was 32 pages of comics. And Jim Sassville drew in those 24 hours one 8-page story, and Charles Schulz did 24 pages of story.
Oh, wow.
Which makes it, if you've heard of 24-hour comics, that would be a very early example, 24 pages in 24 hours. So that material is all in Complete Peanuts 26, although not in the best layout format. But some of the material, the trying to remember, was just reprinted in a book called Dell Peanuts Archive.
Okay.
That was published by Boom.
Okay. Now, is there, maybe you just answered it, but is there a source that has all the Dell Peanut stuff, even if it wasn't done by Schulz, from wherever it originally appeared, Tip Top or anything?
Well, Dell Peanuts Archive from Boom has all, or just about all, it's actually just about all, of the material that was not done for a comic book that had Peanuts as its cover title. So it's got all the stuff done for Tip Top, for Fritzy Ritz, for Nancy and Sluggo, but it doesn't have the actual issues of the Peanuts comic book.
Okay.
So there's about enough material in there for another thick book. It's a thick book. I think got about that much more material to go. Presumably, if this does well, they will dip back into that, which would be good to see, because, as I say, includes basically 24 pages of Schulz material, as well as some Jim Sasseville, some Dale Hale, and by the end, some pretty sorry-looking stuff. At the end, it was being produced by Dell rather than. At first, we're talking about Jim Sasseville and Dale Hale. Those are people who were actually working at Schulz's studio at the time. They weren't helping. They weren't drawing the daily strip at all, but they were helping him in all sorts of other ways, including cleaning up the daily strip, erasing all the straight pencil marks, but also working on the comic book material and things like that. But after a while, some of those guys left. Schulz let Dell do their own material, and then Gold Key did a few stories, and then that whole arrangement ended.
Okay. Well, that one book you just mentioned, I'm going to have to seek that one out, because I think that's what I really was looking for, is if there is because it's like anytime I collect any of this stuff, it's like, oh, here's another issue, and there's one Peanuts page in here, and here's another, and there's one Peanuts page. It's like I can't be getting all these other comic books when I just want the one page, even if it's not by Schulz, but that's just...
Yeah, no, Dell Peanuts Archive is actually a very well done reproduction of the material. A little smaller than a comic book, but the material is done big and open, so that's not a problem.
Okay.
So I really do, if that's what you want, I really do recommend it. Apparently, they left out a few one-page stories that appeared in some of the magazines, but they got all of the 4- and 8-page stories.
Now, did you help out in any way on that volume, or are you just aware of it?
No, I'd actually been in talks with three different publishers over the years for doing collections of the Dell material, and in each case, for whatever reason, it never quite happened. One of the publishers was myself, but I was also dealing with Fantagraphics and Dark Horse, and for whatever reason, things that they were interested in doing, it never quite pulled together. So I was glad to see somebody get it done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then a couple other things you worked on over the years. Chip Kidd did a book called The Art of Charles Schulz, which I liked a lot. What did you do on that book?
Oh, well, if you saw my name on it, you saw the later paperback edition. What I did was corrected some of the facts that were in the hardcover edition.
Well, I have both. I have the hardcover and the paperback because they look different, and they have a little bit of different material, so yeah.
Yeah, they added some additional material for the paperback, which is good, but there were just a few factual mistakes. I list them somewhere on my og.com website.
Okay.
Minor stuff, mostly, but as long as you're doing it, as long as you can put out a new edition, you might as well correct them. So I think I got thanked for that in the paperback, if memory serves.
Got it. Okay. I was just curious about that because, I haven't really sat down. I just knew that the paperback had some additional material, but I didn't really sit down and say, oh, they corrected this, they corrected that. Okay, so now I know that there's some text changes too. So, okay. Two books that came out that were actually, I think they were pretty successful. They certainly got good distribution. It was the 2 hardback books that she worked on. One's called Classic Peanuts, and then it's kind of sequel, I guess, or follow-up or whatever, Snoopy Treasures. How did those books come about, and what makes them unique, too?
Well, the first one's actually Peanuts Collection. Classic Peanuts is another book that's a tiny little insignificant thing that came in a paint-by number.
Oh, did I get the title wrong? I apologize. What was the actual title then?
The Peanuts Collection.
Okay, Peanuts Collection. Yeah, I probably just wrote it down. Yeah.
that was a book put together by a packager called the packager reached out to me because they needed somebody who could write about Peanuts, and they found my blog. And they said, well, you look like you can write. Do you think you can write a book? And they didn't realize I'd written 24 books prior in my career. I'd written things like The Complete Idiot's Guide to PowerPoint and stuff like that. So I was a working writer.
But really, can you write a book? No, just kidding. Anyway, go ahead.
So that was a fun book to work on at the times. I got to do a lot of good research and try to chase down Peanuts in all. My goal was to show, obviously, the Peanuts. The strip is a strong trunk of a tree, which is it's really weight and strong. But you have all these branch offs, you have all these ads, you have the animated, you have all kinds of different things going on. So I wanted to sort of show Peanuts in all its glory. And it's a really cool book because it has a lot of art, reproductions, full color, coffee table type book, but also has removable items, reproductions of Peanuts trading cards and of Peanuts recipe, things you can flip open on the pages, and all stickers and all sorts of interesting material. And some of what's reproduced in there is actually pictures of my own collection, things from my own copies. So I was sort of proud. But I got to do things like interview an astronaut who had taken his childhood Snoopy doll up with him into space. And, there's a lot of good times in there, and the book got very well received. So I was really, really glad to see that, and it sold really quite well. I don't know exactly how well because I wasn't on a royalty term. When you're on royalty, they have to tell you how many to sell to explain how well they're paying you. But when you're not on royalty terms, that's not the case.
Oh, well. And then there's a sequel one, Snoopy, right?
Yeah. Well, technically it's not a sequel because it's a different publisher, but it's very much focused on Snoopy, but Snoopy again in all its forms, and it's. We cover things like all the Snoopy restaurants that have been opened over the years, or that the folks traveling folks in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. There was one stretch of the river called Snoopy's Nose, which was actually quite dangerous. There was a big loops like Snoopy's Nose, and what that meant is you were going from a place where the enemy could spy you on the bank on one side of the loop and run over and be ready for you on the other. So it was a very dangerous place. But Snoopy going off into space as part of the space shuttle. Snoopy as the Snoopy one, the blimp that MetLife was doing all kinds of things. So there's lots of little stuff in there, but there's also obviously a lot of stuff about the strip, a lot of stuff about the character, how it was developed, things like that. But just celebrating Snoopy in all its forms.
Are there any plans to do any more books like that, or about other characters in the strip, or no? It's like
I'm sure everybody's demanding the Big Pig Pen book, but
yes.
They haven't come to me to write it yet, so we shall see. There's nothing currently in the work, but often what happens is an anniversary happens, and they say, well, for this anniversary, we want to have some sort of book out.
Right.
So the Peanuts collection was like the 60th anniversary, I think it was. So if that happens, I'd be glad to do it.
Okay. You mentioned it earlier, and then we'll kind of talk about it now. So you originally started in, I don't know how you pronounce it, but I'm sure it's blog. Yes. And now an accompanying podcast. So how did the blog come about, and how did it evolve into a podcast?
Well, the blog started in part because about the time that Charles Schulz announced his retirement, suddenly people became very interested in Peanuts, and that was the end of 1999. He announced that, and Peanuts books became hard to find. I already had a website which listed Peanuts books and had ordering links to Amazon, so I could make a little money off of it. If you take you to the site and you saw a Peanuts book you wanted, you clicked on the link. Amazon gave me a little bit of the money when you spent it. They didn't charge you any more, but they gave me a little cut for sending you their way.
Right.
So I was making a little bit of money on that, but I started to discover that most of the links were going to things that were out of print because suddenly all the copies of any Peanuts books were gone. So I started monitoring what was available and started sending out a and while I was there, I was also making comments about new Peanuts books that were out or interesting things I had found. And so that ran as an email newsletter for a while and then eventually translated over into a blog. That way I could post something whenever I wanted to. I wasn't harassing people by email, although you can get the blog by email if you want. And it just kept on going. And sometimes it would be one post in a week, sometimes it would be 7. It was whatever I had to do. I didn't try to force it. But since I get in a lot of Peanuts books, we publish a lot of Peanuts books, and I list the announcement of a new Peanuts book, and then when it comes out, I review it. So there's a lot of material to be had. When they first show the cover, I run the cover. There's a lot of material to be had in there, and I get into a lot of interesting side things. So that was going on for quite a while. And then a little over a year ago, I started thinking the blog things are sort of dying a little bit. The blog is available to Facebook, but that causes problems. So blogs are sort of losing people. But I also wanted to experiment with podcasts. People keep telling me I have a good voice. And I have to believe them because I hear it enough times. Well, no, I'm serious. You never sound really impressive to yourself. And in fact, if you hear your voice recorded, it loses some of the timbre that you hear it inside your head. So you sound even worse recorded than you do in your head. But I heard enough times that I had enough voice. I'd done a little bit of voice stuff before recording books for the blind and dyslexic, textbooks mostly, as a volunteer thing. But I wanted to do a bit more. And the podcast, to a certain degree, it's fun to do. It's something to do, but it's training for me so that I can record audiobooks at some point.
Got it. Okay.
So, but I figured I'd do it weekly. I'd try to get myself enough material. I built up a few episodes ahead of time, and the last, what I call Augtober, that was my big release. And every week since then, there has been a new episode. And sometimes it's 5 minutes, and sometimes it's 45 minutes if I have an interview or something. Sometimes they go that long, but most of them are in the 15-minute-ish range. So I just went up yesterday's in the 15-minute range. And I do all kinds of things within the context. Most of it's about Peanuts books. Sometimes it's just a deep look at an interesting book like Peanuts Project. The first episode, I actually recommend people go to try it. They try the first episode, which usually isn't the case with things because you learn things after the first episode. But I'm still so proud of the first episode. Okay. And that isn't so much focused on books as on a series of Peanuts film strips from about 1979, I think it was, 1979. They did a series of film strips, Charlie Brown's career education program. And all about, it's all done as Peanut stories, but it's all about, you may have a lot of different jobs in the future. The job you get in the future may not be something that even exists today, that you can follow your interests and have that build into a job. And there's like 30-some film strips in this. And people, if I'm talking to younger people, they may not know what a film strip is, but it's more, think of it as an animation that's not very animated. It's a series of still frames with audio, or you can think of it as a PowerPoint presentation of a Peanut story.
Right. Okay.
But there was a character in these film strips that was never in the strip.
Really?
There was a character named Dolores who was Latina. And presumably it was done for diversity reasons, because you're talking to U.S. school children, you're talking to a diverse group of folks, and you want at least a reasonable attempt at representation. So Franklin was used a lot, but Dolores was introduced just for the film strips. And she appeared in probably every one of them, or almost every one of them. And my finding this material actually answered questions for a Peanut expert out there who was really into Peanuts animation, but there's a book which says, here's the cast of Peanuts animation, here's the girl who plays Dolores, and he was, for years, going, who? There's no Dolores in Peanuts. But it was in the film strip.
Now, go ahead.
Well, so I've got a couple clips of her talking in there, but just talk about it in general, and I think it's a good piece. Well, it seems like people were paying attention to this at some point, because first Dolores started getting mentioned on there's a Peanuts wiki. It's a wiki just about Peanuts, and Dolores popped up on there. Suddenly, somebody was talking about it and was using. I guess not the. I blogged it first. There was question material from that, but they were using the blog as a reference. But recently, there's a Peanuts game for your cell phone, and Dolores showed up in it.
Yeah.
And I can only assume it's somebody either saw my material or saw it on the wiki because of my material, and that I rescued this thing, this interesting thing, and it's out there again.
Wow. Now, did Dolores, was she drawn by Schulz on this film strip, or drawn by, like, Melendez Productions or whatever? Who was doing the artwork?
It's more of a Melendez production look. I have no idea if Schulz may have done a design drawing for her or not. I'd be a little surprised if he did, but it's not definite.
Okay.
So there's still some history to be dug up there.
Okay.
But at least I've started to pull it out of the weeds.
I wonder if Andrew Farrago knows about that because he did his Peanuts character book recently.
Yes, he does know about that because I asked him whether he's covering Dolores, and he said I don't know. And he and I did a panel at San Diego Con. He was running the panel, which was sort of based on his book. We wanted people to talk about their favorite obscure Peanuts characters, and so I said I'm going to talk about Dolores. That was Dolores. Dolores is mine to a certain extent. It's mine. It's not. It's everybody's. It's Schultz's. It's whatever. But I feel this extra little. If I'm not speaking for Dolores, who is?
Yes. Well, I'm glad you basically rediscovered her. I will give you credit for it because I certainly never heard of it. So, let's see. Well, that's pretty much all I have about Peanuts. I just wanted to touch on a couple other things. I actually met you once a long time ago. I don't know if you remember this, but
I've got a very poor memory for such things.
Yes.
But you were magnificent.
You actually signed it. So from your About Comics imprint, I bought a book from you, Panel 1, Comic Book Scripts by Top Writers, and. Do you still work with those type of things, or is it all Peanuts nowadays, or do you kind of keep your toe in on other projects at this time?
I have a lot of other things. Okay. Things. Panel 1 is still in print, and that's a collection of comic book scripts by a variety of folks. Neil Gaiman's in there, Kurt Busiek's in there, Trina Robbins in there, Jeff Smith, Kevin Smith, lots of good folks, because I wanted to, I've been a comics writer for a long time, but I always wanted to see other people's scripts. Everybody has their own style. It's not like screenwriting where there's an official style you have to follow. Yeah. And so this was always my answer to what does a comic script look like, is this book. And other people, the reason everybody let their scripts be used in that, because that was their answer. That was a question they always wondered when they were trying to get started. Yeah. So I still do publish some comics creation related materials, absolutely. Okay. But even though my company is called About Comics, I do more than comics these days. Got it. I publish some novels, some of them reprint. I reprint a series of Jewish James Bond parodies from the 1960s. Lock's Finger, Matzo Ball, things like that. And I published some new novels by a guy named Robert Mayer who wrote Super Folks, which is a very influential novel about superheroes. Okay. So I put out one edition of Super Folks that's out of print, but I publish a lot of his more recent stuff. Things like that. But the thing I'm doing that's the biggest part of my life right now there's two things I'm doing big parts of my life. One of them is not a big money maker. I am reprinting a lot of books of Catholic cartoons, mostly nun cartoons from the 1950s. Wow. Yeah, it's sort of this rabbit hole. When I get curious about something, my form of researching it is publishing. Mm. So I reprinted like about 24 of these booklets, these cartoon booklets. Mm-hmm. And I also have a feed called The Daily Nun. If anybody's on Twitter or Instagram, @DailyNun1 will get you a nun cartoon in your feed every day. And I've got enough to go several years with that. Wow.
Who was drawing or writing these? Various or?
There's various folks. A lot of it's done by a guy named Joe Lane, who actually that wasn't his real name. His real name was Joe Eichberger, and he was a platinum age comics artist. Before Superman, he was working at DC and other publishers doing comics. He went off to war. He came back. He started doing even before the war cartoons for a Catholic publication, and so we got that going. But we've got some other guys. We've got a number of books by a guy named Al Kilgore. We have one book of nun cartoons by a woman who I'm still doing the research, but I'm pretty sure was a nun. So that's kind of cool. And I'm about to come out with a book of monk and nun cartoons by a guy I know was a monk. And I also just came out with a book of friar cartoons by a guy I know was a Jew, and he didn't follow that religion. But it's a mixed in there. We have award-winning cartoonists like Al Kilgore, or long-running favorites like Cliff Worth, who just did booklets of nun cartoons or priest cartoons in the 1950s.
Wow.
Yeah. But my biggest thing business-wise at the moment isn't comics at all. As a publisher, it's something called the Negro Motorist Green Book.
Oh, I heard about that. I didn't know you were working on that.
Yeah, I am the guy who is reprinting old editions of the Negro Motorist Green Book. I've been doing it for a couple of years now. For people who haven't heard of it, this was a travel guide used by Black Americans during the segregation era. It was published from about 36 to 66, and it lists places hotels that would take black customers, restaurants that would serve black customers, gas stations. You couldn't even count on being able to buy gas if you were black. Wow. So this made traveling across the country. Travel was going crazy at the time. We were building all these freeways, and people were going everywhere. But if you were black, you had to plan out your path carefully to make sure you didn't end up in a place where there was no place to sleep and no place to get gas.
Right.
So this booklet made that possible, and these have been selling really well. They sell well on Amazon, and they sell well at museums. The Smithsonian African American Museum, the National Civil Rights Museum, the Brown versus Board of Education Historic Site. Any place that's concerned with civil rights, it has a gift shop that this is a good home in. But as we're speaking, a week or two ago, they released a movie called Green Book, which is about people traveling around the country using the Negro Motorist Green Book. And suddenly, we're already very strong sales have gone through the roof. Well, one of the editions was in Amazon's top 1,000 bestsellers for about a week there, and a really good week to be high because people were doing Christmas shopping. So I've been. That's a large part of my business. I've got 8 editions of this out at this point.
Now, what do you do? Are you reprinting each book in its entirety, or are you just bringing out highlights of it, or what are your books featured?
In its entirety.
Wow.
We're doing facsimile editions. Occasionally, you have to take ads that were originally on the inside front cover and move them to the back of the book, just because the printing system we're using doesn't print on the inside front cover. But other than that, this is reproducing the original books. They weren't that long. I mean, they were like 80 pages, many of them. So, and we've got, as I say, we sell them through Amazon for $8.99 a piece list. Actually, they often discount that even. So, it's not. You get one of these in your hands, and you're feeling history. You suddenly get a sense of it's such a practical item that really conveys the reality of the moment. I'm really amazed at how people react to it.
Is there any history added or introduction or something so you can understand what you're reading?
At the back,
okay.
we put some history of the Green Book and the guy who created it, whose name was Victor Hugo Green.
Got it.
That's why it was the Green Book. He made the covers green just to tie in with it being the Green Book, but he was the green behind the Green Book.
Oh, I didn't know that. Good to know. Interesting. I'll have to check one of those out. And you say there's a movie about it right now, or is it out now? Or
it's out now. There's a movie. It's got a lot of Oscar buzz. It stars Viggo Mortensen and Mahershala. I probably mispronounced that. Mahershala Ali.
Okay, I have read about that. Okay, I have not seen it yet. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's called Green Book because of the Negro Motorist Green Book. They show that in a few scenes, them using it to figure out where the black character can stay,
Okay.
where Dr. Don Shirley can stay.
That's probably where I was reading about it. It was in Rolling Stone. That's actually where I was reading about it. So, okay.
Yeah.
So now
and
it's
let me tell you, as a publisher, there are things worse than having a major Hollywood studio spend millions of dollars promoting the thing that you've got a book out of.
Yeah.
You know?
Perfect. Yes. All right. I do want to say one last thing about the Panel 1 book, that I mentioned earlier. Yes, it did finally help me out. I'll read your inscription to me. You said, "To Mark, good luck with your scripts." Well, I actually did get 2 published scripts with American mythology, one for Three Stooges and one for Ant and the Aardvark. And I used your book to kind of figure out how to write a script for a comic book. So it was a help. So thank you.
I'm glad to have been of help. That's what I'm here for.
It only took like 20 years, but hey, or whatever, but eventually I got around to getting some published stuff. But anyway, I guess that's about all I was going to ask, and we've covered a lot. Just want to plug anything else, websites, podcasts, or anything else that's up and coming for you?
Unfortunately, my up-and-coming stuff is mostly still private. I've got a graphic novel in the works, and I'm doing some work for an anthology, but I can't talk about it yet, except to say that things exist. People haven't seen a lot of comics from me for the past few years. The Peanuts material was the last batch of comics I did, but there is other stuff coming.
Cool.
But if any of the stuff that we talked about regarding Peanuts interests people, I suggest they go to augh.com. That's AAUGH.com. And there they'll find the blog, there they'll find the podcast, there they'll find a collector's guide to all the Peanuts books that exist. At least all the ones I've found in English, and there's an awful lot. So it's a good place to be. And again, I suggest they try the first episode of the podcast, and if they like that, there's already 50-some more, and there will be more to come.
All right, very good. Well, I want to thank you today, Nat, for being my guest. And
thank you for having me.
I will be talking to you soon. Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.
Thank you for listening, and thank you again, Nat Gertler, for being my special guest. Episode number 21 will be coming soon. If you would like to comment and or be a guest on this podcast, please drop me a line at funideas.mark@gmail.com. You can become a Patreon of Fun Ideas Productions, and if everyone listening just contributed $1 a month, that would be a tremendous help. This has been the Fun Ideas podcast. This is Mark Arnold speaking. This episode is copyright 2019, Fun Ideas Productions. Thank you very much, and have a good night.